Did you know that the battle between good and evil began long before any human set foot on Earth? Even before time itself started, something extraordinary and terrifying happened in the universe. God's angels, beings of light and perfection, rebelled. One angel, the most beautiful of all, turned against the Creator himself, taking a third of the heavens with him. What seemed like a celestial war turned into a cosmic drama, with consequences that echoed throughout creation. The big question is, how could beings as grand and perfect as angels fall? What happened in that moment of pride and rebellion that split the heavens and cast an eternal shadow over humanity? The answer is closer to us than we might think. What happened to the fallen angels isn't just a distant story, but a reflection of the battles we face every day against our own temptations and negative impulses. For instance, when you're tempted to lie to cover up a mistake at work or in your personal life, you're facing a choice between truth and lies. Lying might seem like an easy fix, but just like Lucifer lost his place by choosing pride, lying leads us away from the truth and true peace. Just like those angels chose the path of destruction, we too are challenged at every step to choose between light and darkness, between obedience and rebellion. But in the middle of our journey, humanity was given a promise, a chance of redemption, an opportunity to live in harmony with God, even after making wrong choices. The judgment of the fallen angels and everything that followed challenges us to reflect. How far are we willing to go with our choices? Can we learn from their fall, or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes? In the beginning, even before time began, a cosmic battle broke out at God's throne. Like an unexpected whirlwind, the forces of creation turned against themselves, and everything that existed was torn apart. Imagine for a moment a war fought in the very foundations of the universe. The angels of light, beings of pure energy and majesty, became agents of darkness. They rebelled, tearing apart the harmony that once existed. This was the first shock, the beginning of the fall of a heavenly empire, which, once destroyed, would pave the way for the creation of a new cycle. Now you must understand, this cosmic war wasn't just a battle of invisible forces, but a struggle for control over the very essence of creation. Think of a time when you had to choose between doing what's right and doing what's easy. Maybe you faced the temptation to take shortcuts, like when a coworker asks you to do something you know is wrong but seems more convenient. Choosing to do what's right may not be the easiest, but it's the choice that aligns us with the light of God, just as Michael's loyalty kept him from bowing to Lucifer's promises. In this scenario, every act of rebellion reverberated through the universe, causing profound impacts far beyond mere disturbances. The first sparks of evil, like something in its early stages, began to form in the hearts of those who were meant to uphold the celestial order. Throughout history, we hear about crucial moments, but this was the true beginning, the spark that would set off all the destruction to come. If you could have looked up at the skies at that moment, you might have witnessed a spectacle of light and shadows colliding, a clash of forces that would determine the course of all creation. This is where it all begins, and where, in a way, we can reflect on our own internal battles and choices. Everything you see in your life today, the decisions you make, in some way, reflect that first great conflict. You might wonder, how do these cosmic battles relate to my daily struggles? The answer may be closer than you think. Every choice to be good or bad, to embrace the light or the darkness, traces back to that first division. Our own challenges, the internal battles we fight, are echoes of those primordial forces. However, fully understanding this cosmic conflict is what can make us more aware of our actions, because the war began in the mind and heart of powerful beings. Believe me, the cosmic war is alive in us at every moment. It might seem like a distant tale, something that could just be part of a myth, but it's not. In fact, it reveals the nature of both creation and destruction. When evil starts to take shape, it begins in the realm of the mind. Look at your life today and see if some of those seeds are being planted. Maybe you're facing important choices, challenges that in some way require decisions that will influence your future and inner peace. No matter how distant it may seem, the initial cosmic war begins in the small things, like a simple thought, an act of inner rebellion. It's in this context that the great clash takes shape, the one that separates light from darkness. In the microcosm of our lives, these forces continue to manifest, but always with a choice. Have you ever wondered how many times in your life you've been tempted to listen to thoughts that weren't good? And how many times have you chosen the light, the goodness, over the darkness that seemed easier or more attractive? The cosmic war wasn't limited to the heavens. It's also reflected in who we are and in the choices we make. This is a crucial point. The cosmic war continues within all of us, at every moment. If we can understand this concept and learn to recognize the small internal battles we fight, we'll start making wiser choices. But how can we know if we're truly making the right choices? By observing the essence of each decision, you'll realize that it can lead us either toward good or evil, toward light or darkness. Just like in the beginning of creation, our paths are shaped by these daily choices, guiding us toward balance or chaos. When reflecting on the past, you might see that many of the difficult moments you've lived through can be explained by those choices. The cosmic war is not just a distant, abstract battle. It reverberates in each one of us, every day. Every act of kindness or evil, every thought, is a reflection of something greater. What do you choose to feed within yourself? The war isn't over. It's far from finished. It continues in every decision you make, and this is where the secret to balance is revealed. Victory or defeat begins within each of us. Yet, the big question still remains: what will be humanity's next step in this cosmic journey? And so, as we reflect on the initial cosmic war, we come face to face with a fundamental truth. The fight is still ongoing. It wasn't confined to the past. It is alive. And this leads us to a turning point, to what happens next, what's to come in the story of this eternal battle. But before we move forward, are you ready to understand the implications of what comes after, the crucial role of one of the angels closest to God? Before the rebellion, heaven was a place of order and perfection. God had created a celestial kingdom where angels were distinct beings, each with specific roles, performing essential functions for the workings of the cosmos. They were, in essence, the expression of God's glory and majesty, made to worship Him and serve His will. Among all these angels, one stood out: Lucifer. He wasn't just the most beautiful, he was also the closest to God. His role was special, almost like a ruler of light responsible for reflecting and protecting the Creator's glory. Lucifer wasn't just an angel, he was the perfect angel, radiant, a true marvel of creation. And it's exactly here that the story of his fall begins, for in understanding his closeness to God, something started to change within him. This proximity, which should have been a cause for humility, gave rise to something far more dangerous in Lucifer: a quiet pride. He wasn't just a servant of God, he was an essential part of his creation, and this awareness made him feel special, something that, in a way, we've all experienced in our own lives. When you're good at something or feel recognized for your abilities and talents, the temptation to think you're better than others can be strong. But, like Lucifer, often pride can grow subtly, and without realizing it, we start acting with the desire to be more than others. Like when at work we try to diminish the effort of colleagues to stand out. This can pull us away from our true purpose, which is to serve others and recognize our place within the whole without the desire to be superior. Lucifer, however, wasn't satisfied with his self-esteem. He began to see his position as a sign of superiority. The line between recognizing his worth and excessive pride became thinner and thinner. This moment leads us to reflect. How many times in our lives has the desire to be recognized crossed the line of humility and turned into pride? It's at this point that we should stop and reflect. When do we start feeling so certain of our own importance that we begin to disregard others or the authority over us? Often in our everyday lives, what happened to Lucifer also happens to us, though on a much smaller scale. When we feel exceptional, the risk of ignoring the limits placed on us increases. Maybe you found yourself in situations where your pride was greater than your wisdom. The story of Lucifer is a reminder that even the greatest can fall when they lose humility and become prisoners of their own ego. The celestial order was a place of harmony, where everything had a purpose, and Lucifer, with his privileged position, was meant to be the model of this harmony. However, Upon realizing his own brilliance, Lucifer didn't settle for being a reflection of God's glory. He wanted to be the glory itself, to replace the Creator, to have control. The temptation to be the center of the universe is a universal human weakness. And here we see how, even in heaven, this desire to stand out can arise from a heart that refuses to be limited. When you start seeing yourself as the center of everything, you lose sight of the true reason for your existence. Notice how this manifests in your life. How many times have you wished to be recognized, or even to surpass someone you saw as more successful or influential? We all have a tendency to want to be on top, but as Lucifer's story shows us, this unchecked desire can pull us away from our greater purpose. Lucifer's pride wasn't just about being the best, it was about wanting more, desiring the power that didn't belong to him. And here's another lesson: there is a limit to what we can desire, and when that limit is crossed, the consequence isn't reward, but a fall. Heaven, with its order and harmony, was about to be shaken. What should have been a union of purpose was now becoming the stage for an irreversible division. The desire to achieve more, to be more, to control more, was something Lucifer began to intensely desire. He was no longer just a servant, he wanted to be the master. By desiring more than he was given, he not only challenged the celestial order, but also questioned God's very sovereignty. Can you see how this resonates in our world? In some way, all of us have been challenged by our own desires, by that insatiable will to have more and be more. The important thing here is to remember, true greatness isn't about wanting to be more than others, but in understanding our place and our purpose. Lucifer's distorted desire brings us to a point of deep reflection. What would you do if you were in his place? The order of heaven was about to be shattered by a single choice, a single thought: I can be more. This is where pride begins to take the lead. As we reflect on this, the question becomes inevitable: how do we avoid letting pride and unchecked desire take control in our own lives? And more importantly, how can we continue to serve and respect the greater order without losing our way? What would happen, for example, if we could learn to act without always needing to be the center of attention? As the issue of desire and pride began to take shape, you start to realize that Lucifer's rebellion wasn't just against the celestial order, but against the very idea of serving something greater than himself. This was the beginning of a series of choices that would lead to the great battle in heaven, where loyalty and pride would collide. But before we move on to the grand battle, it might be worth reflecting on something fundamental. The choices we make every day can be as powerful as Lucifer's. After all, who decides what we should do with the power we have? As Lucifer reflected on his greatness, the pride in his heart grew like a flame that without control would turn into a wildfire. Initially, the desire to be more didn't seem negative. After all, who hasn't wanted to reach their full potential? The problem, however, arises when that desire transforms into an obsession for overcoming and controlling, as if it were possible to be greater than the Creator himself. Lucifer, who was once entirely dedicated to worshipping God, now felt that his own beauty and power were enough to govern the universe. The desire to be above everything and everyone became an obsession that distorted his true mission. This growth of Lucifer's pride didn't happen overnight. He didn't wake up suddenly thinking he could replace God. Instead, it began with a subtle thought: what if I were more? What if I could have everything I desire? The temptation to want more than we have is always present in our lives, isn't it? When we're dissatisfied, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that what's missing could make us more complete, more powerful. And this is where the danger lies. Dissatisfaction with who we are can lead us down a path of self-deception, just like it happened with Lucifer. Have you ever caught yourself thinking you could do something better than what was given to you? Perhaps you felt underestimated, or maybe looked at someone else's success and thought, why don't I have that too? This comparison is natural, but if we're not careful, it can quickly escalate into pride, convincing us that we deserve more than we have, without truly considering what our purpose is. Lucifer began to believe that his position wasn't enough. He felt that he should be the center of the universe, the highest being, the only one worthy of worship. And this is where his pride began to shape his actions, with a sense of entitlement to something that didn't belong to him. Lucifer's growing pride was also fueled by his great intelligence and beauty. He knew exactly how to convince others to follow his ideas, to believe in his vision. Imagine a charismatic leader with persuasive power, using his beauty and skills to attract followers. Lucifer, with his celestial brilliance, began seducing other angels, presenting them with a new idea. Why should we be subordinate to anyone? Can't we be equal to God? Wouldn't it be wonderful to rule the universe together? This idea started to resonate, especially among angels who in some way already felt an inner unrest. This seductive movement, which seemed so harmonious and logical, ended up being the first crack in the celestial order. How many times in your life have you seen ideas that attract us but deep down might lead us astray from the right path? The way Lucifer used his influence to spread pride among the other angels is a crucial lesson about the dangers of manipulation. He didn't impose his vision aggressively. Instead, he offered an attractive alternative, a path that seemed more glorious, more grand. This makes us think about how often ideas driven by ego and pride can be incredibly seductive. Have you ever stopped to think about the times when someone, or even yourself, was drawn to a concept that seemed so good, but upon delving deeper, turned out to be full of pride and personal ambition? When pride grows, reason begins to be clouded by the illusion of power. Now Lucifer, with his group of followers, began to see the rebellion not as an abstract idea, but as a real movement. He no longer thought about serving, but about being served. He believed that his beauty, power, and intellect were enough to justify ruling the universe. Here comes a profound question. How many times in our lives have we allowed ourselves to believe we are more than we really are? The ego, if left unchecked, can create this illusion, and in doing so we lose sight of our true purpose. Arrogance feeds on the belief that we are better than others, and with that, the true mission we were given gets lost. This same illusion of power, which led Lucifer to grow in pride, also led him to a point where he could no longer retreat. He had dragged other angels with him, and now the rebellion had escalated to a cosmic scale. But at some point, the choices made out of pride began to stray from the path of truth and light. What seemed like a fight for greater freedom was, in reality, becoming a trap that took him farther away from his true purpose. And so, as Lucifer's idea expanded, the celestial order began to slowly crumble. But for the real battle to begin, he needed to take the next step, convincing others that he was right. This process of growing pride can be a powerful lesson for all of us. In our own lives, we're constantly tempted to stray from our purpose, to give in to the temptation of pride, to want more than what's due. But before moving forward, have we ever stopped to reflect on how far pride can take us? And what happens when our actions, driven by that pride, begin to affect the people around us? The inevitable moment had arrived. Lucifer's pride and rebellion had already grown to immense proportions. Heaven, once a realm of harmony and order, was now the stage for an epic battle, with angels dividing between those who remained loyal to God and those who followed Lucifer in his quest for power. The struggle wasn't just physical, it was a war of ideals and purposes. Lucifer and his followers, no longer merely dissatisfied but fervently rebellious, faced the loyal angels, commanded by the archangel Michael. The battle in heaven reflected the internal struggle of each individual, the fight between light and darkness, between humility and pride, between order and chaos. Have you ever found yourself in a situation in your life where, alongside a just cause, you had to fight against something greater than yourself? Whether it was a battle for a principle, for your faith, or even for something you believed to be right. Just like in heaven in our lives, these battles are often not easy. Sometimes we need to summon the courage and strength to resist the temptation to give in to what seems more attractive, more convenient. True strength lies in resisting temptation, just as Michael did by not yielding to Lucifer's promises. Michael, as the leader of the faithful angels, represented resistance to Lucifer's desire to become more than God. He didn't fight with hatred or vengeance, but with an unwavering commitment to divine truth. His followers, also loyal and determined to protect creation, were armed with the light of God. However, the battle wasn't just about physical strength. It went deeper into the purity of spirit, the clarity of purpose, and the strength of faith. Imagine a battle where what's at stake is not just physical dominance, but the very essence of being. The forces at play in that war weren't just those of a celestial struggle. They were the fundamental forces of creation, morality, good and evil. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where, alongside a just cause, you had to fight against something greater than yourself? Whether it was a battle for a principle, for your faith, or even for something you believed to be right. Just like in heaven, in our lives these battles are often not easy. Sometimes we need to gather courage and strength to resist the temptation to give in to what seems more attractive, more convenient. Michael and his loyal angels didn't surrender to Lucifer's brilliance and promises. They understood that no matter how seductive the power he offered, true strength lies in standing firm in the truth and light. What followed was an intense war, not only on the celestial plane, but also in the hearts of all involved. Lucifer, aware of the beauty of his own idea and his persuasive power, used every resource at his disposal to convince more angels to rebel. But Michael, with his unshakable loyalty, did not yield. The battle in heaven was, in truth, a reflection of the battles we all face in our lives, where temptation and doubt challenge us to abandon what is right. Lucifer, with his charisma and brilliance, is like those who try to convince us to take the easier path but not the just one. However, what Michael and his angels demonstrated was something fundamental. True strength lies in resistance, in loyalty to what is pure and true. When the battle reached its peak, Lucifer and his followers were finally defeated. But their defeat wasn't just physical, it was a spiritual defeat, a reflection that pride, even in its most seductive form, cannot prevail against light and truth. Heaven, now marked by this war, would never be the same, but a crucial lesson had been learned. The battle in heaven didn't just symbolize Lucifer's defeat, but the reaffirmation of the celestial order, the proof that no matter how tempting rebellion may be, it can never overcome the power of good. And on a deeper level, this battle teaches us something crucial. The fight between light and darkness is not only in the spiritual realms, but within ourselves. Although this war took place in heaven, it echoes in our own lives. We all face internal battles, where pride and the temptation to follow wrong paths challenge us. It might be a struggle for our values, our beliefs, or even our place in the world. Just as Michael did not give in to the pressure, we too are called to resist the temptations that pull us away from our true mission. The battle in heaven was the first, but it has never stopped happening within each of us. And as we reflect on this, we ask ourselves, what do we do when the battle comes? Are we ready to fight for the light? After Lucifer's defeat, he and the rebellious angels not only lost the physical battle, but they were also condemned to fall to earth. This defeat marked the beginning of a new chapter. But what would come next? The war was far from over. What happens when the darkness defeated in heaven descends to earth? After his defeat in heaven, Lucifer's transformation was both irreversible and devastating. From a radiant angel, he found himself stripped of his light and dignity, cast out of the celestial realm where his majesty and beauty dissipated. This fall wasn't just physical, it was spiritual and emotional. The being who once reflected God's glory now found himself in a deep abyss, a void where his light faded, replaced by darkness. From Lucifer, the bearer of light, he became Satan, the adversary. He and the other rebellious angels, now demons, were banished forever from God's presence, condemned to eternal suffering. Lucifer's fall is one of the most powerful lessons about how pride can lead to self-destruction. When vanity takes over, the price to pay is incredibly high. But what exactly does this transformation mean? Lucifer, once a being of light, now found himself turned into a being of darkness. Darkness is not merely the absence of light, it is the transformation of a being into something completely opposite of what it once was. This is a concept that goes beyond a simple physical fall. It is a collapse of the very essence of the being. When someone, or even ourselves, starts to drift away from our true nature, we become more distant from what we are destined to be. This process of transformation, which happens from the inside out, is the essence of what happened to Lucifer. He didn't just fall, he became something entirely different from what he once was. Lucifer's fall and his transformation into Satan teach us about the consequences of uncontrollable pride. When he rebelled, he not only moved away from the celestial order, but he also destroyed the possibility of his own redemption. The pride and vanity of wanting to be more than he was created to be pushed him away from his original purpose. In our own lives, this challenges us to reflect on times when our choices driven by pride might cause us to lose our essence. We all have moments when we want to be more than we are, but it's important to recognize that our greatest downfalls often happen when we stray from what truly matters, our truth and our essence. With Lucifer's fall, creation suffered a rupture. The balance between good and evil, light and darkness, was permanently altered. Satan, now the prince of darkness, and his fallen followers were no longer celestial angels, but beings of pure evil with the sole purpose of sowing destruction. This change, which began with a being of light and ended with an entity of pure darkness, makes us reflect on how small choices can drastically alter the course of our lives. What started as a desire to want more, to achieve more, transformed into an eternal prison. And this prison was not just physical, but a mental and spiritual one, where repentance would no longer be possible. Lucifer's transformation and his fall to earth also show us how suffering can become a vicious cycle. From a glorious angel to a condemned demon, Lucifer became an example of what happens when the pursuit of power turns into obsession. Not only was he banished, but his fate and that of the angels who followed him were sealed forever. In our lives, we may often find ourselves trapped in a cycle of dissatisfaction, always seeking more, always wanting more, until the price becomes higher than we can pay. The suffering of Lucifer and his followers reflects what can happen to us when we don't control our impulses and greed. But the most interesting aspect of this transformation is that, upon being cast to earth, Lucifer, now Satan, found a new purpose. In his fall, he took with him a third of the angels, and now his mission was clear: to corrupt humanity. As a being of darkness, he sought to destroy everything that was good and pure, attempting to lead all human beings into the same condemnation he had reached. This new role of Satan, as the tempter and corrupter, makes us reflect on how the forces of evil work in our lives. How often does temptation appear disguised, seducing us with promises of power, pleasure, or status? Satan, in his new form, became the personification of these temptations. Lucifer's path, transformed into Satan, also warns us of how easy it is to lose control, especially when we are feeding something inside us that is unhealthy. Pride, vanity, and the desire for power can start as small seeds, but if left unchecked, they can grow into something much larger, something destructive. Like Satan, we can become prisoners of our own choices, with no way of turning back. But before Satan's story takes on larger proportions, a great question arises. What would happen to humanity in the face of the temptation to follow the steps of the Prince of Darkness? With this, Satan's journey and the fallen angels on earth were just beginning. The fall from heaven to earth wouldn't be the end, but the start of an even darker plan, where the fate of humanity would be tested. How would darkness spread across the earth? What would this mean for the future of creation? Only time and the choices of each human being would reveal the true impact of Lucifer's fall. And this is where our story truly begins. With the fall of Lucifer and his followers to earth, creation entered a new stage of chaos. Now Satan and the fallen angels, once beings of pure light, were immersed in darkness and emptiness, seeking a way to exact their revenge against God and destroy humanity. The earth, which had been a place of harmony, began to be corrupted by these beings of darkness. Their goal was no longer to serve God, but to ruin his divine work and corrupt creation, especially the most precious of God's creations, humanity. The one who had once worshipped God now became the greatest enemy of the Creator, and his purpose was clear: to lead humans to the same fall that he had experienced. Imagine the scene: an earth now under the influence of forces that had never existed there before. Satan and his fallen angels began to act insidiously, infiltrating the human heart. The temptation, which had once been confined to the celestial realm, now manifested directly in the choices and decisions of human beings. Like a master manipulator, Satan used his intelligence and power to spread evil, distorting divine truths and creating seductive lies. By deceiving humans, he sought not only to destroy their souls, but also to prevent them from fulfilling their true purpose in creation. This corruption wasn't just physical, it was, more importantly, spiritual. He knew that the greatest blow to God would be to destroy what was most precious to him, the heart and freedom of the human being. As Satan and his followers spread across the earth, evil became increasingly evident. But the way this evil manifested wasn't obvious. On the contrary, it was disguised with subtlety. Temptation often appeared in an attractive, seductive form, promising pleasure, power, and instant gratification. Many human beings began to give in to these desires, unaware that they were being manipulated by far greater forces. Satan, now in the role of tempter, understood human weaknesses like no one else. He didn't need to force, he simply needed to seduce. And so, he began to corrupt humanity, leading them to believe that the path to happiness lay in material and temporal things, diverting them from what truly mattered, a life in connection with God. These fallen angels, now transformed into demons, also had a crucial role in this process. They were the agents of corruption, spreading chaos and suffering, instigating human beings to give in to sin and destruction. But Satan's seduction wasn't limited to a superficial attraction. He sought to incite the worst human instincts: greed, hatred, envy, and covetousness. Man, who was meant to live according to God's light and wisdom, now found himself ensnared by these destructive desires, pulling him farther from his true nature. Corruption spread like poison, transforming earth into a place where goodness and light became increasingly scarce. But the question that arises is, how did humans, created in the image and likeness of God, allow themselves to be corrupted so easily? The answer is that temptation is always stronger than we imagine. The desire for power, control, and immediate pleasure can be irresistible. Just as Lucifer succumbed to pride and the desire to be more than God, humans also began to give in to these selfish impulses. They turned away from divine truth and embraced what seemed easier, more attractive, yet would lead them to destruction. And this is what makes temptation so dangerous. It promises everything, and at the same time, it steals everything. The price of sin is higher than any temporary pleasure it might offer. Much like Lucifer, humans, by allowing themselves to be seduced by these forces, began to distance themselves from their true nature. Each time they gave in to temptation, they moved farther from the divine light, becoming more enslaved by their own passions. The corruption, which began with the fall of a celestial being, now affected the entire world. What was once a garden of perfection was now becoming a battlefield, where the forces of good and evil clashed at every moment, both within and outside the human heart. The struggle that started in heaven was now being fought in every thought, every choice, and every act of humanity. But the most interesting aspect of this process of corruption was that Satan didn't just create chaos and destruction in a direct manner. He also became a master of deception, using doubt and confusion to trick human beings. He made people doubt God's goodness, His justice, and His plan for humanity. He led them to question the purpose of their lives, making them believe they could be happy on their own, without the need for a creator. And so, humanity began to drift away from its original destiny, believing lies and building a world where the truth was distorted. As the darkness spread, humanity found itself trapped in a vicious cycle of sin and suffering. Evil, once planted by Satan and his followers, continued to grow, bringing more pain and desolation to a world that had once been perfect. But what's most striking about this story is that, despite all of this, the divine plan was still in motion. Humanity, though corrupted and lost, was not without hope, but this hope would only reveal itself later, and for that to happen, humanity would need to face the reality of its fall and repent of its ways. The battle was far from over, and the final resolution was still to come. Now, with the corruption of humanity fully underway, the question arises, how far could evil go before it was finally stopped? What would be necessary to restore the order that Satan and his fallen angels had destroyed? The answer is closer than many might imagine, and the story of redemption is about to begin. Faced with the growing corruption and chaos caused by Satan and his followers, God decided it was time to intervene directly. The earth, which was created to reflect his glory and perfection, was now overtaken by evil, destruction, and sin. Evil spread across all corners, affecting even the purest hearts. Humanity, which had once been envisioned by God to live in harmony with him, now found itself in a state of moral and spiritual degradation. The divine plan, which had once seemed perfect, now faced a serious obstacle. The very human beings who were meant to be the guardians of creation were giving in to sin. Therefore, God's judgment became inevitable. He could not allow evil to continue growing without a response. In our own lives, we often make wrong decisions that have lasting consequences. Maybe you've done something you deeply regret, like a choice that destroyed a friendship or a relationship. These consequences serve as a reminder that our choices don't just affect the present moment, but also our future. In this scenario of destruction, God didn't act with haste or cruelty. He patiently observed humanity's decline, giving them time to repent and change their ways. However, the perversity was so great that instead of repenting, people continued to turn away from God, mocking his justice and ignoring his warnings. This is where the deep lesson about the consequences of choices comes in. When people stray from their true nature and ignore the signs given by God, they put themselves in danger. Judgment isn't just a punitive divine action, but the result of humanity's persistent choice to stay in error. It was then that God, to purify the earth and give humanity a new chance, decided to send the flood, a global judgment to cleanse the corruption that had spread. The flood was not just a physical inundation, but also a spiritual act of purification. God wanted to show humanity that sin and evil could not be tolerated forever, but that he still offered a way of salvation. Amidst the destruction, God chose Noah, a righteous man, to be the archetype of salvation. Noah and his family would be preserved, and through them, a new generation could arise, free from the corruption that had dominated the world. But at the same time that God sent the flood as judgment, he was also offering an opportunity. The ark built by Noah became, in a symbolic sense, the path to salvation. Through it, those who were willing to hear God's call could escape destruction. Noah, with his unwavering faith, became the example of obedience and trust in God. Even when the world around him was submerged in sin, he was the guardian of God's promise for a new beginning. For us, this story teaches the importance of obedience to God, especially when the world around us seems to be going against what we know is right. God was not only a punitive judge, but also a merciful God. The flood, though a severe judgment, was also an opportunity for a fresh start. The idea of purification through destruction is a complex and powerful one. For the new to flourish, the old must be removed. And that's exactly what God did. He removed the corruption and evil that had dominated the earth, allowing through Noah a new cycle of life to begin. Each wave that covered the world seemed to bring cleansing, a new beginning for humanity. This divine action shows that, even in moments of great suffering and destruction, God still preserves hope and the possibility of renewal. If we look at our lives today, we often go through moments of purification that may feel like a personal flood. They might be periods of pain, loss, or change, where what once seemed safe and certain crumbles around us. But just as the flood brought a new chance for Earth, these difficult times can also be seen as opportunities for growth and renewal. The suffering and destruction that overwhelm us, though painful, can serve as a catalyst for a fresh start. When you feel everything around you is falling apart, think of the flood. Sometimes God needs to clear the mess to bring a new perspective, a new path. God's judgment on earth and the subsequent purification teaches us that, at any moment in our lives, we are not exempt from the consequences of our choices. But it also reminds us that no matter how dark the path may seem, there is always an opportunity to start over. Humanity, like that generation before the flood, is called to reflect on its actions. Are we building our own ark? Are we preparing for judgment, trusting that God in his infinite mercy always offers a way out, an opportunity to restore what was lost? And most importantly, are we willing to heed the call for renewal, Or, like the men and women before the flood, do we choose to ignore it and continue in the darkness? Now, with the purification of the earth, the story begins to take a new turn. What will happen after the renewal? How will humanity, now renewed, deal with the legacy of its actions? The purification brought the chance to start over, but the future would still depend on the choices that men and women would make. And while the flood seemed like the end of an era, it was also the beginning of something greater. But what would come next? After the flood and the purification of the earth, the story of the fallen angels was far from over. While humanity was given a new chance, the fallen angels, now known as the Watchers, were confined to a much darker fate. These beings, who had once belonged to the celestial order, were now imprisoned in spiritual chains in Tartarus, a deep and endless abyss. Tartarus was not just a physical place, it was an eternal spiritual prison reflecting the state of their corrupted souls. The failure of these angels was not only their rebellion against God, but also their inability to repent and return to the light. Their fate was sealed once and for all, and their punishment would be eternal. But why was the fate of the fallen angels so severe? The answer lies in the nature of their transgression. While humanity, though corrupted, still had the chance to repent and reconcile with God, the fallen angels made an irrevocable decision. They had directly witnessed the glory of God and consciously rebelled, fully aware of what they were doing. There was no room for repentance for them. The transgression of the angels was not like that of humans, who often act out of ignorance or weakness, but rather a deliberate choice, and this is what made their punishment irreversible. This separation between the fallen angels and humanity leads us to a deep reflection on the consequences of our choices. All of us at some point are called to make decisions that define our destiny. Sometimes it seems that these choices carry no weight, but as we saw with the fallen angels, some decisions, made with full awareness, have an eternal impact. The difference between humans and the fallen angels lies in the fact that while humans still have the opportunity to repent and change, the fallen angels lost this possibility when they rebelled against the Creator himself. This raises an important question. Are we truly aware of the consequences of our actions? How do we make our choices, knowing that some can change our lives forever? Despite being imprisoned, the Watchers, or fallen angels, continue to have an impact on the world, for even in their state of condemnation, their influence still resonated. The evil they sowed on earth did not disappear with their fall. Their followers, the demons, continued to spread darkness, attempting to corrupt the human heart. While they no longer had the power to affect the celestial order directly, their presence in the shadows was still felt in every temptation, in every doubt that arose in human hearts. The struggle between good and evil continued, and Tartarus with its prisoners represented the last reminder of a cosmic rebellion that still reverberated in the world. Just as the fallen angels were condemned to eternal imprisonment, our own life journey can be seen as a process of choosing between light and darkness. Every action we take has weight, and while we may temporarily stray from the path of truth, there is always a chance to return to correct our course. However, the example of the fallen angels also teaches us that, at some point, if we're not careful, wrong choices can become so deep-rooted that, like them, we may find ourselves imprisoned by our own decisions, with no chance of return. The decision to remain faithful to the light or succumb to the darkness is a vital matter, and as long as we live, the possibility of transformation is still within our reach. The fact that the fallen angels were eternally imprisoned in Tartarus also shows the cost of rebellion against the divine order. No matter how glorious you may have been, if your choices are directed toward evil, the price will be the total destruction of your essence. But there is also a valuable lesson in this story. While the fall of Lucifer and his followers was final, humanity has not yet reached that point of no return. God's mercy offers a way back as long as we are humble enough to choose the light. And even though the fallen angels have already been condemned, the struggle for redemption is still at play for all of us. Symbolically, the Watchers teach us about the fragility of absolute power. Even beings as powerful as the fallen angels were not immune to the consequences of their choices. In the end, they were only reminders of the fragility of human pride and the reckless pursuit of control. Their prisons were not just physical, they represented the condemnation of their spirits trapped in their own arrogance. This challenges us to think, how do we handle the power we have? How do we choose to use it? We must not forget that true strength lies in recognizing our limits and remaining faithful to truth and light. While the fallen angels are imprisoned in Tartarus, awaiting final judgment, the story of humanity continues. The battle between light and darkness is not over, but the eternal prison of the Watchers serves as a reminder of the gravity of our choices. Humanity still has the chance to redeem itself and avoid the mistakes of those who, through pride and rebellion, chose the path of darkness. But what will happen when the final judgment comes? What will become of us who are still free to choose? Satan's reign, which seemed eternal, was about to come to an end. Although he had managed to corrupt humanity and sow evil across the earth, a final event was approaching: the judgment of Satan and the collapse of his dominion. The kingdom he had built, from the fall of the angels and the darkness he spread, would not last forever. According to God's divine promise, evil would be defeated, and the enemy of humanity would finally face the justice he so rightfully deserved. However, the end of Satan's reign would not be simple. It would come through the greatest battle in history, the Battle of Armageddon. The Battle of Armageddon, prophesied as the final confrontation between good and evil, would be the stage where the true glory of God would be revealed. Christ would return, not only as a savior but in glory, to face Satan and destroy once and for all the followers of evil. The earth, corrupted by sin and devastated by destruction, would finally be purified. For years, Satan had tried to manipulate humanity, drawing them away from God. He was the master of lies, seducing people into worshipping themselves and rejecting divine truth. But Christ's return would change everything. The Battle of Armageddon would mark the end of Satan's authority on earth and the ultimate victory of light over darkness. When Christ returns, it will be with power and authority. It will not be a silent or peaceful return. He will come with the heavenly armies to defeat Satan and his followers. The battle will be intense, and the demons who had corrupted humanity for so long will finally be defeated. Satan's reign, which had lasted for centuries, will be destroyed forever. Christ's victory will be a demonstration of divine power and justice. Just as light dispels darkness, God's truth will be revealed, and Satan's lies will be exposed. Humanity will finally understand that, despite the temptations and hardships, true peace can only be found in the path of God. However, the end of Satan's reign will not be just a military victory. It will also be a spiritual victory. By defeating Satan, Christ will not only destroy the physical evil, but also break the spiritual bonds he had established over humanity. Satan, who had deceived mankind into living in rebellion against God, will be defeated, and true freedom will be restored. The price of sin, the pain and suffering caused by humanity's wrong choices, will finally be eradicated. Satan's kingdom, built on lies and manipulation, will come to an irreversible end. Christ's victory will be the proof that, in the end, good will always prevail. This victory, however, is not just a lesson from the past, but also a lesson for the present. If Satan, with all his power and deceit, was defeated so definitively, it teaches us something crucial about our choices. The forces of evil may seem irresistible, temptations may be intense, and difficulties may make us question God's justice. But just as Satan's kingdom, everything built on evil and lies is destined to fall. This gives us hope and strength to resist temptations and continue on the path of truth. The end of Satan's kingdom is a promise that, no matter how hard the struggle, the final victory is guaranteed for those who remain in the good. This victory of Christ also brings the promise that evil will be banished forever. When Satan is defeated, he will be cast into the lake of fire, a place of eternal torment, where he and his followers will be condemned forever. Evil will no longer have power over creation. The suffering and pain he caused will be eradicated forever. The kingdom of Satan, built on lies and sin, will be destroyed, and the earth will be restored to its original condition of harmony and peace. Christ's victory will mark not only the end of Satan, but also the restoration of what was corrupted by sin. As we reflect on this final event, we realize how much it connects with our own lives. Often we are tempted to follow the path of lies, selfishness, and pride. The kingdom of Satan in our everyday lives manifests as the desire to be more than we truly are, or as the temptation to yield to sin. But just as Satan's kingdom will meet its end, our own battles against evil also have an end. The final victory has already been won, and darkness no longer has the final word. We must live according to this truth, knowing that with Christ by our side, we are destined for victory, regardless of the difficulties we face. And so, with the final defeat of Satan, the reign of darkness comes to an end. But what will happen after this great battle? What will become of creation after Christ's victory? The answer is about to be revealed, the promise of a new beginning, a new era, where God's light will shine forever over all. After the final defeat of Satan and the end of his kingdom of darkness, a new chapter in creation would begin. Christ's victory would not only destroy evil, but also open the way for the complete restoration of all that had been corrupted. In his infinite mercy and power, God would create a new heaven and a new earth, where peace, justice, and harmony would reign forever. The earth, once corrupted by sin and destruction, would now be purified, reflecting God's true will for all of creation. Suffering, pain, sin, and death would be eradicated forever, and humanity would be called to live in perfect communion with God. This new heaven and new earth would not simply be a restoration of what had been lost, but a radical transformation, something even more glorious than all that had existed before. The new heaven and new earth would be the full realization of God's purpose for humanity and the universe. What had once been stained by corruption would now be renewed, completely transformed by God's glory. Every human being, redeemed by Christ's sacrifice, would be part of this new creation, living in peace, harmony, and joy, free from the limitations that sin had imposed. Imagine a place where there is no more pain, where tears do not exist, where darkness cannot prevail. This is the promised future, a place where God and humanity will dwell together without separation. The creation of a new heaven and new earth represents the end of the story of evil and the consummation of the divine plan. Perhaps you have found yourself in a moment of great mistake or loss, but just as the new heaven and new earth represent a fresh beginning, you too have the opportunity to start anew. Imagine that you made a great mistake in your life, such as losing the trust of someone very close to you. You can choose to live with the weight of that mistake, or you can choose redemption, to apologize, correct your actions, and restore the relationship. The opportunity to begin again is something that is within your reach now, just as the new beginning that God offers to humanity. The battle between good and evil, which seemed endless, now came to its conclusion. Just as, by forgiving and redeeming yourself, you close the cycle of error and begin a new journey, Christ, by defeating Satan, brought the end of the cosmic struggle, offering humanity the opportunity to start over. Christ's victory over darkness is the confirmation that, in the end, evil will never prevail. No matter how much darkness tried to dominate the earth, light will always prevail. Humanity, now free from the slavery of sin, will live forever in God's presence, experiencing peace that transcends all understanding. Creation in its fullness will be restored, and God will finally be all in all, as he was in the beginning, but in an even more glorious and perfect way. This new heaven and new earth also show us what God planned from the very beginning, a place of communion, worship, joy, and rest. The scriptures speak of a heavenly city, the New Jerusalem, where God will dwell with his people, and there will be no more pain, death, or suffering. The old conflicts and difficulties will be forgotten, for the glory of God will fill all space and all time. Christ himself will be the light of this city, and all nations, peoples, and tribes will come to it to worship the Lord. There will be no more separation between the Creator and creation. Instead of living in a world marked by distance and alienation from God, humanity will now live in full communion with him, in perfect peace and harmony. And the most incredible thing about this promise of a new heaven and new earth is that it is not just something distant, but also something that begins to be lived in our hearts. We were created to live in communion with God, and although sin has separated us from him, the work of Christ already offers us the opportunity to experience a glimpse of that peace and renewal. Even in the midst of life's difficulties and challenges, we can feel God's presence in our hearts and know that one day all things will be restored. The new heaven and new earth are a promise that, although they may seem distant, are already beginning to manifest in our lives as we walk with God. As we reflect on the future of creation, the promise of a new heaven and new earth challenges us to live with hope and faith. In a world that often feels lost, it's easy to feel discouraged. But God's promise of a new creation reminds us that, in the end, good will always prevail. Although we may face hardships, tribulations, and challenges, we can live with the assurance that Christ's victory is final and that true peace will come. Evil may try to dominate, but in the end, God's glory will be revealed and His creation will be restored to perfection. This glorious future is not a fantasy, but a promise that will be fulfilled. And all those who are with Christ will live forever in this new heaven and new earth. And as we reach this final point, it's impossible not to ask ourselves, are we preparing for this future? Are we living according to the hope that this promise brings? Because, as history teaches us, the victory of Christ and the creation of a new heaven and new earth depend on the choices we make today. How are we living now, while waiting for the great day of final restoration? Now you have an opportunity to reflect on something crucial. The choices we make every day, no matter how simple they may seem, have the power to shape our destiny. Just like the fallen angels who made the decision to rebel, we too are constantly challenged to choose between good and evil, between light and darkness. Every choice we make reflects our heart and our loyalty, whether to God, to truth, or to something that at first glance may seem more attractive, but deep down will only lead us farther from true peace. Think about the paths you're choosing now and how they are shaping your future. The story of the fallen angels and the final judgment teaches us a powerful lesson about the dangers of pride, disobedience, and impulsive choices. But the big question is, what are you doing with the power of choice you hold in your hands? Are you being faithful to truth and light, or are you letting yourself be seduced by the lies and temptations that the world offers? Remember, it's not just about the big decisions, it's also about the small daily choices. Every thought, every action is an opportunity to align your life with what is true and just. The final judgment will be inevitable, but the good news is that transformation is already within your reach. Forgiveness, restoration, and the chance to begin again are always available to those who seek truth and light. And you have that chance now, in every choice you make. Don't let time pass by while you postpone the change that can begin today. If you desire to change your trajectory, even in the face of difficulties, know that you are not alone. Victory and peace are already within your grasp, but they require action and commitment. Don't wait until the last moment to reflect on your choices. The transformation you seek begins with a simple yet powerful act of deciding to be faithful to what is greater than you. By choosing the light, you will be preparing yourself to live in harmony with the divine plan for your life. The big question remains, are you ready to live according to this truth? Are you willing to make choices that lead you to true peace and freedom? The journey may be challenging, but the reward is eternal. Do not let evil have dominion over you. Now is the time to act, to decide, and to embrace true change. Every moment of our lives is an opportunity to begin again. Think of a situation where, choosing between good and evil, you have the chance to reflect on which path to take. Perhaps it's in a moment of conflict at work, or in a family discussion, where by choosing peace and reconciliation, you reflect the divine character and take one step closer to the light. If you are committed to your spiritual growth, self-awareness, and the desire to live a life aligned with God's purpose, this is the moment to make a difference. True change starts within you, and it is now. Don't wait any longer. Be sure to keep following our content. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue learning and reflecting on topics that can transform your life. Let's go together on this journey of self-discovery and growth. See you next time.